Welcome to CryoClear Training and Certification. Our course is divided into a number of parts, each reviewing key knowledge and understanding that will help you maximize the utility of your CryoClear device. The first section deals with the physiology of the skin, and as you may know quite well, the skin is the largest organ of the body with a total area of about 20 square feet. The skin protects us from microbes, from elements. It helps reduce and regulate body temperature as needed. It permits sensations of touch, heat, and cold. The skin is divided into three main layers. The epidermis, the outermost layer, which gives us our waterproof barrier and creates our skin tone. It's where CryoClear spends most of its time with treatments. The dermis, the next layer down, contains tough connective tissue, hair follicles, and sweat glands. And finally, the deepest subcutaneous tissue layer, the hypodermis, is made of fat and connective tissue. The skin's color then is created near the epidermis and is a key part of our focus. Now, the epidermis, as shown in this slide, is divided into 5 layers. The epidermis varies in thickness throughout the body. The thinnest areas, such as the eyelids, are 0.05 millimeters, and the thickest are on the palms and soles of the feet at 1.5 millimeters. The epidermis's 5 layers, starting from bottom to top, are the stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. The cells of the epidermis really divide into function. They are held together by desmosomes, and the 3 different types of cells within the epidermis are Langerhans cells, melanocytes, and Merkel cells. The melanocytes produce the pigment melanin. The Langerhans cells are the frontline defense of the immune system in the skin and form a key function for protection. Merkel cells function in what's thought to be some relationship to touch receptors. However, it's not entirely understood. Now let's look at the role of the individual cells a little more deeply. Langerhans found in the epidermis are important for the immune system. They ingest antigens when stimulated and present them to the immune system to be disposed or rid of. Langerhans are affected by UV radiation, which can kill them. So any loss in Langerhans cells are a key loss to the body's ability to fight off infection, and so they must be protected. This comes in then the role of melanocytes in the epidermis and their ability to produce melanin. Melanocytes are stimulated by sun exposure, linking it to what we just talked about with Langerhans cells. Melanocytes are prominent in the dermis. They produce the melanin, which then rises to the surface over time. There's 2 types of melanin, a dark brown pigment eumelanin and a red-yellow pigment pheomelanin. The skin contains the same number of melanocytes no matter what the individual's natural light color. Melanocytes in darker skin are more active than those in lighter skin, and keep in mind that the eyes and the hair also contain melanocytes. What can affect melanocytes in terms of decreased functionality are age, and here we see age spots, liver spots, which are an accumulation or pooling of melanin, sun damage, which may lead to sunspots or solar lentines, hormone fluctuations, such as we see in melasma or colasma, trauma, which could lead to post-traumatic hypopigmentation or hyperpigmentation, and finally genetics, the most obvious being freckles. Now, melanin distribution in the epidermis takes place by a pretty defined mechanism. So as we know, melanin is a chemical. It's formed by a process that metabolizes the amino acid tyrosine. So in the skin, melanin is formed by cells called melanocytes. We know that there are medical conditions which can produce a lack of or defective melanocytes. Albinism is one that comes to mind. Melanin provides many benefits to human beings. One of the most recognized, of course, is protection against UV light. Melanin's natural protection is key for us because of all of the other negative effects that UV radiation can have on us. So melanin is synthesized at the bottom of the epidermis in a region called the basal layer. Special cells located in the basal layer, termed melanocytes, produce melanin-containing packets called melanosomes. This process is termed melanogenesis and is initiated once the nuclei of skin cells become damaged from UV light, either from the sun or even from a tanning bed. So the melanosomes are then spread to separate keratinocytes or skin cells throughout the epidermis, and they are carried by the tentacle-like projections called dendrites. Once the melanosomes reach the end of the projections, they are squeezed out into the keratinocytes. This is shown in our slide here, where we can see the pathway that the melanin will follow. As the melanin moves to the upper layers of the epidermis, it of course eventually flakes and is removed through natural processes. Let's talk about melanogenesis a little bit more. We know that melanin is key to a protective function with us and also gives us our healthy look. People with higher Fitzpatrick types naturally have more protection than those with lower. And melanin protects the deeper layers of the skin from UV radiation. It's key attribute. Uneven distribution or increases in melanin produces the irregular pigmentation of which much of our aesthetic work is focused on correcting or removing. And the sun is the key culprit in producing much of this damage, even affecting us down to our capillary and blood flow. Now let's go a layer deeper to the dermis. The dermis is made up of 80% water, elastin fibers, and collagen that float in a glycoprotein or sugar-like gel. The dermis is a tissue supporting the skin. In contrast to the epidermis, it's vascularized, enabling it not only to provide energy and nutrition to the epidermis, but also play a role in thermoregulation and in healing. The dermis is 10 to 40 times thicker than the epidermis, so it's substantial in terms of its mass. At the junction between it and the epidermis, there's surface bristles that are fibrous, vascular, and nervous, all in one, and this area is known as the dermal papillae. Fibroblasts are the main cells in the dermis, and they're essentially located in the dermal papillae close to the epidermis. They're found only in low numbers in the deep layers of the dermis, known as the reticular dermis. So the other key thing we want to point out about the dermis is that it produces two types of protein fibers, collagen and elastin. These constitute the extracellular matrix within the dermis. 70% are collagen fibers in this area, and they give the dermis resistance to strain and traction, while elastin supplies its, as you would expect, its rubber band-like or elastic properties. So the dermis, with its vascularization, with its cell types, with nerve endings, really becomes highly important. And then the last part that exists or originates in the epidermis are hair follicles, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, apocrine glands, lymphatic vessels, and blood vessels. When we expose ourselves to environmental insult, we bring about significant changes at times within the skin itself. This can include skin cancer in the form of melanoma, non-melanoma skin cancer, and also basal cell carcinoma. There's also short-term, such as after a sunburn, and long-term exposure. Long-term exposure is where we generally see changes in pigmentation and thickening of the different layers. So actinic keratosis is an example of a non-cancerous or precancerous lesion. We see pigmentation and freckles and solar lens times and sunspots, and then accelerated aging issues, which are at a much deeper level, as we've discussed in the dermis, where we see wrinkling, which is the loss of collagen and elastin, and also dilated blood vessels. Now let's just review, as we start to wrap up this section, a few of the key items that relate to the different layers of the skin. So in the epidermis, where we have a variety of cells, the key is for us is melanocytes, which produce our natural color and protection. They respond to UV light, and that's how they're stimulated. And if we wound or compromise this capability, especially on the epidermal layer, we open ourselves up for infection, for water loss, dehydration. We also affect our skin color, both our ability to protect ourselves from the sun, and also aesthetically we may begin pooling or thickening areas with melanin, further showing that we've had a deeper insult to the skin. In the dermis, we have a couple of key materials that help give us our form and maintain our elasticity. Collagen and elastin are both proteins that are major extracellular constituents of the skin. In addition to that, we have nerves and capillaries, which bring food and take away waste. And nerves, of course, give us our sensation, our ability to react to the environment around us, whether that's heat, cold, pressure, or pain. So any loss or compromise in this section really has gross anatomical changes that may be seen in our appearance, as well as functional ones where we can't sense or feel our environment around us. Next, on the epidermal and dermal layers, because the two are related in these particular functions, we have hair follicles, sweat glands, and sebaceous glands. Now, of course, hair can provide some thermal regulation and protection. It also, of course, affects our physical appearance. So changes to it or loss of it, such as in alopecia, will have, again, effects on our outer appearance. Whereas sweat glands and sebaceous glands really have much more functional relationships. The sweat glands, of course, give us thermal regulation, and so if you've ever seen anyone with the genetic defects that do not have their sweat, no ability to maintain a homeostasis or a balance between the inside and outside environments. And sebaceous glands, while giving some conditioning and pH control to the outer surface of our skin, also have an antimicrobial function, which when lost, again, only opens us up to infection through the largest organ of our body, the skin. The last slide that I'd like to mention here, again, concludes us with the idea that overall the skin as an organ protects us against so much, regulates, controls, and protects all in the same. So now as we begin the rest of our certification course, move to the quiz, and we will see you in section 2.